Please be advised that this recorded webinar has been edited from its original format, which may have included a product demo. To set up a live demo or to request more information, please complete the form to the right. Or if you are currently not on CSC Global, there is a link to the website in the description of this video. Thank you.
Hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Dissolutions and Withdrawals Best Practices. My name is Annie Trivoletti, and I will be your moderator. Joining us today are Robert O'Byrne, Pat Nolan, and Helena Ledick. Rob is a team leader and strategic account manager for NLJ 250 law firms with CSC in the Manhattan office. He advises all levels within the law firm on strategy, service, legal, technology matters, day-to-day UCC, and corporate transactions. Pat has been a customer service specialist at CSC since 2003 with over 35 years in the legal services industry. In his role, Pat provides exceptional customer service to business, legal, and financial professionals worldwide by helping form corporations, LLCs, and other business entities. Helena is the Associate General Counsel for CSC in the Chicago office. She is a business attorney advising senior management and law firms on strategy, business, legal, and technology matters. And with that, let's welcome Rob, Pat, and Helena.
Thank you, Annie. Hello to everyone in the audience who's attending. Our agenda today for dissolutions and withdrawals is we're going to cover what is a dissolution. We'll get into Delaware dissolutions. We'll discuss articles of dissolution and what exactly is a withdrawal. Rob and Pat are also going to take us through challenging states for tax clearances. We'll learn more about that, but tax clearance issues can be very complex. We'll learn about termination in lieu of a withdrawal. We'll have a checklist there, and then we'll have a Q&A session at the end. Before we jump into dissolutions and withdrawals, let's learn a little bit more about CSC. We work with over 180,000 corporate customers, including more than 90% of the Fortune 500. For our law firms, we work with more than 10,000 different law firms out there. We work with 3,000 financial market customers, and then we also protect more than 65% of the 100 best global brands, including 7 of the top 10. And now, Pat and Rob will take us through the topic of dissolutions.
Thanks, Helena. Now we're going to talk about what a dissolution is and the two different types, the good kind and the bad kind. A voluntary dissolution is the good kind. When a company is done with its activities in a state where it's incorporated and does no longer want to pay taxes, it dissolves. That's a voluntary dissolution. In some cases, especially for older companies, their charter may have set a limited duration. So in that case, no action is needed by the company, but if your charter has set June 30th, 2020 as your dissolution date, on that date, your company is automatically dissolved. That's not too common anymore, but it's always a good thing if you're ordering charter documents to just look to see what the duration of the entity is. In most cases, it'll be perpetual. An involuntary dissolution, the bad kind, is where the state dissolves the company. It's usually done as a result of the company not being in compliance. And the most common reason for an involuntary dissolution is that the entity fails to file an annual report and pay its annual fees.
Process to file a Delaware LLC or LP is a simple process. You just file the cert of cancellation and pay any taxes owed. Please note that the Delaware franchise tax payment is $300 per year and is due on June 1st. There is no actual annual report needed, but a payment is made online to the state. The process to file a Delaware Corp is a little more complex than an LLC or LP cancellation. Any annual reports owed and a certificate of dissolution is needed. For Delaware corporations, the reports are due March 1st, and all Delaware annual reports are required to be filed online. To complete the annual report, you must have the principal address, phone number, one officer, and all directors' information. Articles or certificates of dissolution is a form filed in the jurisdiction after all the corporation's debts, liabilities, and taxes have been paid. When filed, the corporation's status is legally confirmed as terminated. One thing to note is that certain states require tax clearances prior to the certificate of dissolution. These can be very complex and require tax information and an accountant. One other thing to note is they do take time, with certain states taking 6 months to even in other states taking 2 years. Please note that third-party vendors such as CSC cannot obtain information due to confidentiality.
Now that we've talked about dissolution, Pat's now going to take us through the topic of withdrawal.
Okay, thanks, Elena. So just to recap real quickly, a dissolution is the process by which you close your corporation in its domestic state, that is the state where it's incorporated. Withdrawal is the term given to relinquishing your authority to do business in a foreign state, that is a state where you're qualified, registered to do business. Once a company is dissolved, the entity ceases to exist everywhere. It still has to be removed from any foreign states where it's qualified to do business. Just by virtue of filing a certificate of dissolution in Delaware, it doesn't let New York or Illinois or New Jersey or any state where you may be doing business know of the dissolution. So you would have to follow the statute and file a withdrawal. Typically, it's a form called an application for withdrawal. And as was mentioned earlier, some states require that you obtain a tax clearance to be attached to or done prior to filing the application for withdrawal with the Secretary of State or other state agency. So, withdrawal is foreign state, dissolution is domestic state. Okay, and as we mentioned earlier, in some cases to withdraw, there are some challenges, the biggest of which is getting a tax clearance in those states where it's required. As Rob mentioned earlier, some states take up to 2 years. And not to pick on the wonderful state of Pennsylvania, but they probably lead the league in that category. You have to get clearances from both the Department of Labor, which isn't too bad. You can get that in a month or two. But the Department of Revenue can take up to 2 years. New Jersey is another example of a complex state. There are about 5 forms that have to be filled out just to initiate the tax clearance, and then you have to wait to get an auditor in the Division of Taxation assigned, and that alone can take sometimes 6 months. And then the tax clearance usually follows about 2 months after that. Louisiana, as far as the professional that has to fill out the forms, it's relatively easy, as there are no tax clearance forms to be prepared. The application for withdrawal is submitted to the Secretary of State, and the Secretary of State then engages the various state agencies from which clearances need to be obtained. But that process, again, can take 2 years, similar to Pennsylvania. New York State, a tax consent is required to be attached to the certificate of dissolution or the application for withdrawal in both cases, and it can take between 2 to 4 months. The way that is initiated is a final return is submitted, and at the very top of every return filed in the state of New York, there's a box to be checked to mark it final return. This triggers the Department of Taxation to know that the company is wrapping up its affairs and to issue this consent. But again, the Department of Taxation is confidential, so they usually will only work with the taxpayer. Texas, it's similar. The form is relatively simple. You apply for a certificate of account status. Once the Comptroller's Office in Texas is satisfied that all of the taxes have been paid, they issue the clearance, and then an application for withdrawal or the certificate of dissolution, if it's domestic, is filed with the Secretary of State of Texas. Okay, so we've spoken about a regular withdrawal. If a company just ceases operations in a certain state, but is staying in existence in its domestic state and possibly other foreign states, but just wants to wrap up, we'll say in Illinois, if it closed down its business operations there, that's a regular withdrawal. On the other hand, if the company dissolved in its domestic state and was qualified to do business in other states, a simpler option may be available to alert those foreign states that the company wishes to withdraw. The term given to that is called termination, and how that works is as follows. Let's assume that a Delaware corporation is qualified to do business in New York, Texas, and Illinois. We've discussed earlier New York and the pain of getting the tax consent that can take 2 to 4 months. In this example, once the company files its certificate of dissolution in Delaware, you can get a certificate from the Secretary of State of Delaware that attests that the dissolution took place and file that with the Department of State up in Albany. And that terminates the authority of the entity. No tax consent is needed to file with the Department of State. However, you would still have to file a final return, but it would not hold up your getting the company terminated and off the taxpayer's record so they are no longer liable for tax. Similar in Texas and Illinois.
Thank you, Pat, for taking us through the differences between the dissolutions and the withdrawals, and then talking to us about the terminations. Rob now is actually going to take us into a checklist for terminations, something that you might want to print off and keep handy for those difficult situations when you're going through them.
Thanks, Helena. As Helena discussed, I'm going to briefly go over a checklist of all the requirements to dissolve or withdraw an entity. The first thing, that certain states have a file a notice of intent to dissolve, and that's usually a requirement to publish that the entity is going to be dissolving in a local newspaper or business publication. As Pat discussed, you might need a tax clearance letter, and then after you obtain the tax clearance letter, or if it's not needed, you would file the articles of dissolution in the home state. Upon completion in the home state, you would then go and withdraw the entity in each foreign state that it was qualified. You might also need to cancel any permits and business licenses at the local level or county level, and then canceling any assumed names or DBA certificates. One state that we see that quite a bit, people forget to cancel DBAs, are Massachusetts and New York.